Greetings all. I wanted to put together a video which recaps Unit 1 so that you could be prepared for the unit test coming up, due next Friday. And so I thought what I would do is put this video up for you to help you with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to there we go. Now what I'm gonna do is, this is what you see all the time. I'm gonna go to week 2, and then course materials, and I'm gonna scroll down, and you'll see chapter 4 PowerPoint summation. And I'm gonna use this, you have it on there. I'm gonna use this to talk about not only summarizing what I think are the important parts to early colonial America, but also I'm going to help you with the first essay on the unit test, which asks you to compare southern and northern colonies. Obviously, you've already done homework, a homework essay that helps you with this essay. It should not be a difficult essay for you. But let me use this to talk about these early colonial experiences. When we looking at the Southern experience, probably the best example is the Virginia experience. Initially, the Virginia settlement, Jamestown, as I'm sure you already know, was settled by young aristocratic men. They were hired by a corporation to come here and to pick up the gold off of the ground and to put it in their ships and go home and make the corporation rich, make themselves rich. And of course, when they got here, they found out that there wasn't gold laying around on the ground, and that wasn't going to work out for them very well. So the main purpose of them coming here was to gain wealth. It was money oriented. Um, think of these two experiences in this way. The Southern experience was like, for example, if you wanted to go to Florida to visit, you would do a light packing of maybe 1 or 2 bags, and you would go to Florida with the idea that you're going to stay there for a week or 2, whatever, and then come home. So your whole mindset is based on, I'm going there, I'm not going to bring a lot of stuff, I'm just going to go there, I'm going to get what I want, and then I'm going home. So when these people get here, they're not coming here necessarily for the idea of colonizing Virginia. They're here as visitors to pick up all of the gold and the spices or whatever it is they thought they could find, and then go home back to England and live the fat cat life. So when they got here, again, it's just single men. They weren't here to populate the area, just, again, as I keep saying, grab the stuff and go. They didn't bring much of anything to survive. And so when they couldn't find gold, now they had to decide, what are we going to do? And they're sending messages back to the corporation. What do you want us to do? And they're saying, hey, we spent all of this money. You got to find something there of value to make this a profit. And so these young guys basically found that, again, there is no gold laying around. So they grab the Indians and they say, okay, what do you got to help us to try to find gold and silver or whatever. And of course, that didn't work. And then eventually, excuse me, eventually those Indians would show how they could grow crops that the Indians were growing, they initially try to force the Indians to grow crops for them. And eventually that will turn into what we call a cash crop system. The cash crops in particular would be tobacco, cotton, rice, and indigo. Now, hopefully we understand that this kind of farming is very work intensive. You need to have lots of hands to plant and to harvest these kinds of products. And so the first thing they do is they try to get the Indians to do it for them. The problem is that the Indians knew the territory. They said, no, I'm not doing this. And they would run away into the forests and they would never find them again. So the Indian experience didn't work out very well and end up, as you know, getting into fights with them, killing off one another, etc. So they go to the concept of indentured servants. Indentured servants are basically British poor people that were looking for an opportunity that they didn't have in England. And basically they said, look, if you go to the colonies, we'll pay your way. In exchange, you work on a plantation, tobacco or cotton plantation for X amount of years, usually 5 to 7 years. And then after that, we'll give you a little piece of property and you'll have your own piece of property. So a number of indentured servants went there. The problem with indentured servants is twofold. One, a lot of them didn't survive. So the investment for the corporation wasn't very good. The ones that did survive become the competition for the plantation owners, because now they're going to go out to get their piece of land, and they're going to grow the crops that they are accustomed to growing, and now they will become the competition. And so what you end up with down south is more people coming in and moving farther and farther west to get these pieces of land that they were promised. And you get this division between the western people in the western sections of the colony and those established people that are on the eastern coast that have the fine land and transportation networks and ability to get their products off to market and things of that nature. And that becomes a struggle between those aristocratic types that originally started the colony and those indentured servants, those poor people that would move out on the western frontiers of the colonies. And you get periodic revolts by those people, Bacon's Rebellion, Coos Rebellion, etc. So basically what you have here is a very unstable colony. You've got people who are out there purely for the money. It's dog eat dog. It's very individualistic kind of society. They didn't, especially out in the western sections of the colonies, there was no churches, there were no governments per se. The governments were way far east, like in Jamestown, and they're out in the western sections of Virginia. And so it's a very individualistic, do-it-yourself kind of attitude. So from a social point of view, not a lot of social things going on in those colonies. The farms and plantations were spread out all over the place. They were basically their own community. The plantation was their own little community. Outside of that, everybody else was their competition. Now, because of the fact that where they decided to set up Jamestown in particular, which was a marshy land. The water that they on the river that they settled on was what's called brackish. The the seawater would come up into the river where they were at, and so the water would be kind of salty, not terribly useful for consumption. The land itself is again is very swampy, and of course the swamps are going to bring in all kinds of creatures, bringing in malaria and uh, very poor living conditions. The average life expectancy for somebody in a place like Virginia would be about 40 years old. So 40 was an old man in Jamestown, the Jamestown experience. They did have local governance. They created what was called the House of Burgesses, which is a Republican form of government. Basically, people in different sections of Virginia would send a representative to Jamestown to plead their case for their particular area. So that's the southern experience. Let's take a look at the northern experience. And the northern experience, as we know, hopefully, is much different. First of all, the purpose of them being there, getting back to my Florida example, if you are planning on moving to Florida, you have a whole different mindset. You're going to pack up everything you own. You're going to pack up your wife or your husband, your children, whatever, your tools, everything you have, your domestic animals, and you're going to move all of that to Florida with the intent of making Florida your home. And that's exactly what happened with the settlers who moved into the Massachusetts Bay Area. The reason why they came is also very important because it was the purpose of them being there was for religious freedom. Now, why is religious freedom so important in terms of stability? We hopefully understand that they come here. They say, look, we're a community, we're all together, we're all in this together. They create towns and villages. They grid out the towns and villages so everybody has a piece of land. They grid out a chunk of land for the church and for the school, and the community supports one another. So their religion is their glue that holds them all together. Now, of course, the northern environment is such that you can't have, big, huge plantations. The cold weather has a very short growing season. Only certain kinds of crops would grow here. It's very mountainous. So most of them tended to stay by the sea. Obviously, Massachusetts Bay is, right on the Atlantic Ocean. And so they become subsistence farming. So in other words, the difference between the farming in the north and the south is that the farmers in the north were subsistence farmers. In other words, farmers that basically grew the things that they needed to survive. They supplemented that with fishing and hunting, things like that. And the farms became a part of the community. And the farms were operated by the family. So you have farms that are run by the father and the children. The wife was out there and she worked. She did the husbandry, taking care of the pigs and the chickens and all that sort of thing, and grow vegetables, that sort of thing. So it's very community oriented. Even their economy is very community oriented. Of course, being the fact that it's very, very foresty in that area. That, I mean, basically, North America is this huge virgin forest. Um, they take advantage of lumber, cutting lumber, uh, and of course the maritime, which is working on the ships on the ocean, fishing, commercial kinds of fishing, cod and Cape Cod. They would salt them in barrels and send them off to Europe. Um, the fur trade, of course, was big in the north. So they're, basically speaking, their environment is much different than the southern environment. It's colder, which some would suggest makes it actually more healthy. As a matter of fact, the northern colonies enjoyed a very, very long life expectancy for its time. By the mid 1600s, average life expectancy was 60 years old. So it's 20 years older than the Virginia experience. So, what does that mean in terms of society? What does that mean in terms of social wellness? And the answer to that is that now we have extended families. Not only do we have, again, in the South, we have single men trying to do their thing. But north, they have a husband and a wife who have children. Now those children have children. So now the husband and the wife are now grandparents. So now the children have not only their parents, but their grandparents. So we have a very stable society going on in the New England area. In terms of the governance in the New England area, it was based on the initial governments that were created actually on the ship as they sailed to the New World. Before they even got there, they knew that this was going to be a terrible place to try to survive and that they had to stick together. And so they created what was called the Mayflower Compact, those people that were on the Mayflower. And that Mayflower Compact talks about how we're going to create a government, and we're all going to obey the rules, and we're all going to help one another, and that sort of stuff. The New England experience is what we would call democratic. In other words, one man, one vote. They would have what were called town meetings, so that all the men in the town would get together, probably at the church, and they would talk about what was good for our community, and they would vote, and majority win. So that was the basic experiences of these colonies. Again, southern colonies based on gaining wealth, on money, and so their drive is constantly to go out there and make more and more money. Not a lot of social interaction going on, other than on their own personal properties. So that was the southern experience. The northern experience based on religion, and again based on their environment. They a very strong economy in farming, fishing, maritime, which is selling, or boats going back and forth, ships going back and forth, lumber, fur trapping, etc. So that's it for this. The early. That's all I want to talk about for the early experiences of the colonials. I want to talk a little bit about the second question, which is the Age of Enlightenment and the First Great Awakening. And for that, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to my PowerPoint on, sorry, let me get my bearings here. Yeah, I'm going to go to my PowerPoint. And I'm going to scroll down to where it discusses. By the way, everything that I talk about, hopefully you know, is in your text and in this PowerPoint that I'm looking through right now. So what is a lot of you wrote about how you thought that the Enlightenment came about because of the First Great Awakening. In actuality, well, I'm going to give you my opinion for whatever it's worth. Sorry, trying to talk and chew gum at the same time here. Okay, the awakening, I'm sorry, the Enlightenment goes back to the 1500s. The Great Awakening doesn't happen until early 1800s. So I don't think that it's possible for the Great Awakening to affect, I'm sorry, for the First Great Awakening to affect the Enlightenment. So I think what actually happened is this. The Puritans wanted to have ministers. They wanted to train ministers. And so they created seminaries to train ministers. And these would become some of the great northern universities like Harvard, for example. But initially they were created to train men to be ministers. As you've written about, this is the old light world where you have people that believe in the Calvinist concepts of religion. One of the Calvinist religious things that they talked about was, and that we need to understand, is this concept of predestination. Predestination simply says that God has already preordained who was going to heaven and who wasn't. Before you were born, God had already decided who was going to go to heaven and who wasn't. Now, the problem with that is, how do we know whether we are preordained to go to heaven or not? And it's a strange thing that happens, especially in the North, that happens because of this idea of predestination. How can we prove that we are one of those who have been handpicked by God to go to heaven? And the answer for them was, well, God is going to, the Heavenly Father is going to take care of his children. Those people who are doing well on earth, more than likely would be the ones that were chosen to go to heaven once they die. And so if you had good crops, if you had good pigs or horses or whatever, in other words, if there were physical manifestations of God shining his face upon me, then I more than likely would be one of the saved. Now, why that's important is because now these people are going to kill themselves, knock themselves out, to try to prove that they are one of the saved people. How do we do that? We have the best farm. We kill ourselves. We get our children. Knock yourselves out. Make the best farm. Grow the best crops. have the fattest pigs, etc., etc. And if I do that, then God is shining his face upon me, and I more than likely will be one of the saved people. And of course, these people will be the leaders of the colonies. The reality of that is that these are usually the earlier people that come here who take up the best land and the best places. And so therefore they have the most, they have their soil is the best. They're next to a river, so that there's plenty of irrigation, et cetera, et cetera. And the people who come later on, they start moving farther and farther away from those best of areas. And so they're trying to farm on rocky soil and not so much irrigation and stuff like that. So what happens is that the people who form the colonies, early people, they're the ones who become prosperous. They have the best farms, and the people that are coming in have harder and harder time. And again, it's like I was talking about with the Southern experience. As people are coming in, they're starting to move farther and farther west of the Atlantic Ocean. And so they're going to have a harder time than those people who have already taken up all of the best soil and the best land, etc. So, anyways, what we come up with is what we call the Protestant work ethic. Basically speaking, we have Northerners who are working their butts off trying to prove that they are saved, and the result of that is a very rigorous work ethic, and they become very wealthy because of that. So they actually are much more prosperous than those people in the South, for the most part. And it's all because it's rooted in this, what we call the old light way of thinking. So you need to understand that. Okay. The next thing that we're going to move to is this idea of the Great Enlightenment, the Age of Enlightenment. Now, as I said, the Age of Enlightenment goes back to the 1500s. The Age of Enlightenment, basically, as you've already written about, basically it speaks about being a rational thinking person. Why do we believe the things we believe? How do we prove what we believe to be true? Scientific method, all these sorts of things come out of the Enlightenment. For our purposes, two very important things come out of the Enlightenment. One is that we use the Enlightenment thinking, this rationality, this idea of rationality, to apply to our religion, in this case. In other words, these kids that have been shipped off to these seminaries, now becoming universities, are now taking courses in philosophy, taking courses in mathematics and sciences, and they're understanding the concept of rational thinking. These guys that are supposed to be ministers are now going out there and preaching a whole different ministry than the old light ministers. And so they become the new light, and they create what is commonly referred to as the rational Christianity. These new religious groups that become very popular, the Baptists and Presbyterians and all these, are rooted in the idea that we have a rational Christianity. Why would there be a God that would choose certain people to come into heaven and certain people not? That doesn't sound very rational, does it? And so what these people came up with is this concept of God is my personal savior. You know, Jesus is my personal savior, and I have a personal relationship with them. And so I can be saved. There is no such thing as predestination. I can be saved, and that's very popular, especially among the poorer people and the people that have started to move out toward the western sections of the colonies, because now they obviously this is very attractive because now they don't have to prove anything. They have the possibilities of being saved just as much as the fat cat on the East Coast. So my suggestion to you is that the Enlightenment affects the religious movement, better known as the First Great Awakening. As I said, there are two important parts of this Enlightenment that we're going to particularly be interested in. And the other one, and more long-lasting one, is how they look at governance. How do people govern themselves? Why do people govern themselves? What kind of government would best govern us? Those sorts of questions now start to come up. Hopefully we know that at the time, the basic political concept was divine right of kings. Basically speaking, God gave this king the right to rule over us. And if we disobeyed if we disobeyed the king, then we therefore disobey God. If we disobey God, we go to hell. So that was the check. That's how kings with very small armies compared to the population of their country can keep his people in check, simply by saying, hey, look, God put me here. You don't want to disobey me because then you disobey God. So that concept of divine right of kings goes a long way and is around for quite a long time. The Enlightenment, again, is going to say why is this person in the place he's at? Is it just serendipitous that he was the first son of the last king, that sort of thing? Or is there some logic to, reason to, rationality to how we govern ourselves? And of course, the great philosophers like John Locke, and Rousseau, and Voltaire, and those people all started to think about what would a perfect government look like if we had an opportunity to start one. So I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to do a part 2 where I'm going to talk about the lead up to the American Revolution. As always, if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if you want to speak to me face-to-face on Facebook, please do so. Please tell me, and we'll set up a meeting for you. And obviously, again, you can text me, you can email me if you have any problems or whatever. So stay safe, be healthy, work hard. Bye.